Good morning, Drew.
Morning, Gary. How are you?
Well, I just, when I saw the news this morning, I let out a big wow. I guess I always knew it was a possibility, and you did too. But something in me said at the end of the day, I just always felt like that Tom Brady would remain a New England Patriot. That is not the case, and we know nothing lasts forever. And in sports, it's getting to where it's just very, very rare for a quarterback or any position player to start and finish career with the same team. I thought Brady would be a Patriot for life. He announces this morning that he is leaving to pursue another football opportunity. Your takeaway from this bombshell story?
Well, I mean, it really reminds me of Joe Montana and the situation with the 49ers when, of course, theirs was a little bit different. They had another future Hall of Famer in Steve Young that had split time with him and that they had acquired in a trade that they thought, that it could eventually be the replacement for Joe Montana. Joe, had a long career and a great one with them, but it kind of reminds me of that. But, of course, that situation ended up being a trade. They worked out a trade with the Kansas City Chiefs. This is just a situation where, Tom Brady's 43 years old, but it seems to me that, I think they could have probably eventually worked it out and brought him back, but that he kind of wanted to start his own deal and finish his career somewhere else. And that I don't know if Bill Belichick would ever admit this, but that Bill Belichick was ready to move on. It just kind of seemed that way because they never really had a lot of dialogue, Gary, since he opted out of his contract. There was never a lot of intimate buzz as far as that it was imminent that he was going to sign a new contract. I'm like you. I always figured, well, if push comes to shove, he'll end up going back to New England because they've still got a great organization. They got Bill Belichick. He's really tight with the owner, Robert Kraft. But, the more you heard, there just seemed to be some conflict there with Belichick and Brady. And, the 49ers eventually had to move on, and so did the Patriots. That's what's going to be fascinating. Not so much to me where Tom Brady winds up, which could be the Los Angeles Chargers, could be the Bucs. But where do the Patriots go from here? Do they do something in the draft or make a trade, or do they do something in free agency? It's going to be really interesting.
It will be. Of course, they've got the former Auburn quarterback, Jarrett Stidham, on the roster, and I'm assuming he'll get an opportunity to compete. But you're right. They'll absolutely get another quarterback, whether it's through the draft or free agency or a trade. Drew, something that's a little ironic, and I don't know why I thought about it, other than I remember watching the entire game when the Titans upset the Patriots in New England in Brady's final game. You realize his final pass as a New England Patriot was a pick six? Remember that?
Yeah.
Right there at the end of that game?
That's exactly. We actually talked about it on the show this morning on Talking Ball. Scott Tyson, my co-host, brought that up. He said, you do realize that, ironically, Tom Brady, 6-time Super Bowl winner, that the last pass he threw as a New England Patriot was a pick six and a playoff loss. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting that's what ends up being the final pass of Tom Brady's career with the Patriots. And, but you made a good point at the start of the segment. You just don't see, quarterbacks now, no matter who they are, and players spending their entire career with one team. You just really don't. And I think Rob Gronkowski, who ironically just decided to, I think, sign with the WWE, he spent his entire career with the Patriots, but he's even told people he thought Tom Brady was going to move on. And Adam Schefter, who's as connected as anyone in the NFL, was passionate about it the other night, saying that, why is everybody thinking that Tom Brady is going to come back? Because I just don't. They've had very little dialogue, very little talk, and he was right. I mean, Tom Brady had decided to move on, and now it's interesting because both of those teams that he's most prominently mentioned with, the Chargers and the Bucs, weren't very good last year. Now, did he elevate them? No doubt about it, but that's kind of the difference. The Chiefs were a pretty good football team when Joe Montana went there. They got them to the AFC Championship game. These other two squads, not so much. I want to see if there's a mystery team that kind of gets involved because the interesting part of reading the reaction and then Tom Brady's takes on Instagram, and I guess what his people have leaked is that he hasn't made a decision. It's not like it's imminent. And he's about to sign with the Bucs, or he's about to sign with the Los Angeles Chargers. it's going to be interesting in the coming days to see how all this plays out.
It really will, and because again, now this is the greatest to ever do it. I mean, 6 Super Bowls. I think I don't know how many division titles and AFC championships and so forth and so on, but he is 42 years old, and he is, despite his great talent, I mean, he's on the downhill of his career, Drew. So, I mean, I don't see him going to a bad team and making them better at this point. I mean, I think he's going to have to be surrounded by personnel, as you mentioned with Montana, went into a good situation there at Kansas City. Where he winds up, I think, is going to determine a lot about how we're going to remember his legacy. So it's very important for him, I think, and I know he's smart, but to wind up with a football team that's ready to win now, right? I mean, he's certainly not going to go into a rebuilding situation. That would be crazy.
Yeah, you would think. I mean, certainly he's going to have reassurances that, and I think I've heard that he wants to have a say in the offense, which I can understand now. I've also heard he wanted to have a say in the personnel, and I think he wasn't satisfied with New England's personnel last year. His supporting cast wasn't as good as it has been in the past, but certainly I think it's a dangerous slope, though. You can't really let the player be the general manager or the coach. And, he still has to have that respect and has to have that trust with the GM, with the coach, that they're going to surround him with the right talent. I certainly don't blame him for wanting to have some input with what they're going to do offensively. But, I guess, but as far as the personnel part of it, if they have some good players, and certainly the Chargers and the Bucs, for example, do have some nice pieces. But again, I think now, if he can attract some guys, to come onto that roster, that's one thing. But, I don't think he should be able to handpick. But we'll see. I mean, I think Tom Brady's a great player. As you said, as good as we've ever seen, probably the greatest quarterback of all time. Now the challenge for him may want to be that he may want to elevate a team like the Bucs or like the Chargers, who weren't winning a year ago, try to get them back to the playoffs and make a Super Bowl run. And maybe he's still got that magic. I'll say this, though. As good as Tom Brady has been, and he's been remarkably durable, only losing that one season to an ACL, where Matt Castle can thank him for his long career. But I will say, I think overall, I don't think he's the same player he was 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. I think his skills have started to erode. I still think he's a good enough player with the right supporting cast to make a playoff or a Super Bowl run. But he may want to, as competitive as Tom Brady is, and we know that's one thing he is, very competitive, he may want to try to prove to the world, okay, well, it wasn't just Bill Belichick and having a great, organization with the Patriots. I can go somewhere else and elevate them. And if he goes to the Chargers, the LA Chargers, or to the Bucs, that may be the point he's trying to make.
Yeah, it would be an incredible story if he went to another organization after 20 years in New England, 42 years old, and were to lead a team, not even necessarily to the Super Bowl, but just to the playoffs or, in contention for a championship. This is a bombshell story. Drew DeArmond with us from 97.7 ESPN Radio in Huntsville. Here's something interesting to me too, Drew, and granted, we're all dealing with this, COVID-19 and I mean, I think we're all still just kind of in shock, for lack of a better term, to what's happened. But the Shield, the National Football League, it is the preeminent sport in our country, and it's amazing to me with all that's going on and no sports being played. And granted, the draft is going to be impacted. They're going to have to, they're going to have the draft, but won't have the fans there the way they planned. But the last couple of days, the NFL has been so prominently in the news. They got the bargaining agreement done, collective bargaining agreement for 10 years. They're going to 17 games, all this free agency, Brady, Breeze. The NFL still cashing in, Drew. Even at a time when, sports are completely on the back burner, they're cashing in. And I'll tell you this, college football too. The way this thing could stretch out with no sports, if we are fortunate enough to at some point get through all this, can you imagine the build-up and the hunger for football, college and pro football come late summer? It's going to be amazing.
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any question. There'll be everybody will be hungry for for sports to return and to have some normalcy to everything. I think the fans will be very excited. But I will say, I do think this just absolute void that has been created with without having sports would have been even worse if this was during football season. I think people would have been just so distraught, so upset. I still feel, don't get me wrong, for the student athletes in the spring sports, the softball, the baseball, and of course not having March Madness and basketball. It's really, really sad. But football would have, I think there would have been an even stronger reaction. But having football back and having it potentially, Gary, as you kind of referred to it, as restarting the sports world. Yeah, they might decide to wrap up certainly the NBA, and then the Major League Baseball will get a late jump. But having football back in the fall, I agree with you, it could be huge for this country, and I think the fans will be turning out in droves, both for the NFL and college football, just yearning to have sports back, and sports to be able to watch on television and to be a part of as a fan. And there's no question about it that I think people will be thankful if they can get it back, because sometimes that old song, you don't know what you got till it's gone. Well, I think everybody's realizing that we don't have live sports to watch each and every day.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Of course, Drew Brees staying in New Orleans as expected. I want to ask you about Amari Cooper, because news breaking last night, right before I went on the sports, in fact, at 10 o'clock, that he agreed to terms on a 5-year, $100 million contract. That's $20 million a season with the Cowboys. So listen, he obviously not in the poorhouse. I'll be clear on that. But Ed Werder, ESPN, who's really connected to the Dallas organization, and said he talked to a Redskins source directly involved in the negotiation, that Amari turned down an offer from them that would have put him right there with Julio Jones, another former Bama wide receiver, the highest paid receiver in the NFL, that he might have given up in the neighborhood of $10 million. The reason I bring that up is we're talking about millions either way, but I've always said, it doesn't have to always be about getting the most money. And what can you do on $110 million that you can't do on $100 million? And I'm glad to see Amari stick to his guns. He said, I want to be a Cowboy. He felt like he was, incredible break for him when he got traded by the Raiders to Dallas. That's where he wanted to be. So take a little less money to be happy. I know you've got agents and people probably pushing, well, you got to take the biggest deal, but he wanted to stay in Dallas, and that's what he did. I think it's a great fit for him. I think that he and Dak Prescott have a chance going forward to be a dynamic quarterback wide receiver combo, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. I mean, could have gotten more money elsewhere, but staying in Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, I think he was a really good fit with what Dallas is doing. They obviously had, made him their number one wide receiver. And remember, Gary, they were one of the best offenses in the NFL last year. I mean, they put the pieces in place to have an outstanding offensive line that they built through the draft. They traded for Amari. They got a first-round pick for him, from the Raiders. They gave up, a first-round pick, to the Raiders for him. So it would have been really just a horrible, I think, mistake if Dallas hadn't been able to get this deal done for Coop. I mean, if they had, especially if he went inside the division to the Redskins. Now, we know the Redskins are really taking an affinity to Alabama guys. There's no question about that. There would have been a lot of people campaigning if they signed Coop to go ahead and draft Tua and continue the transformation. But, he was such a good fit in Dallas. They had already paid Zeke Elliott. They already paid their tight end. I think Witten will probably be moving on. But they're going to, they franchised Dak Prescott. They're eventually going to get a long-term deal for him. So they were so productive offensively, averaging over 400 yards per game a year ago. I know Dallas hadn't won a Super Bowl in a long time, but they've got a chance to control that division by locking up their stars. And when you've got a Zeke Elliott for several more seasons, when you've got a Dak Prescott and now an Amari Cooper, if you continue to be smart in the draft, if you continue to supplement your defense, I know they lost Randall Cobb, but he's kind of up there. He's on the back end of his career. They can find another slot receiver. I think they still have Tavon Austin. So I think the Dallas Cowboys have got some bright days ahead if they continue to handle their roster correctly and continue to build through the draft. They've been able to refurbish their O-line. Now the deal is going to be to get their defense better, but certainly in that division right now, the Cowboys have to be considered the favorites.
All right, we got to get to a break. We're going to come back with another segment with Drew. We want to hit on Derrick Henry, Kenyan Drake, A.J. McCarron, Jaron Reed. As I said, when you've got the most players of any college university in the National Football League, you're going to be making news. And it's been a huge couple of days for former Alabama players. Also going to ask Drew about Alabama football, how he thinks the players are going to have to handle, how they'll handle this layoff and this not being allowed to be at the football facility and have any organized workouts. So we'll have one more segment with Drew coming up right here on the Gary Harris Show on Tide 100.9 FM. Don't get rewarded the way quarterbacks do. Oftentimes when they do get big deals, their production goes down. So what do you think of the situation with Derrick Henry in Tennessee?
Well, he's going to get paid, Gary. I mean, at worst, he gets a one-year deal for $13 million, and they may revisit the extension next year. But I think since he has until July the 15th, the goal is to get him under a long-term deal before this season. We talked to Blake Bedingfield, the former pro scouting director for the Tennessee Titans. He was in their front office for 19 years. And as he said, Derrick Henry's earned the long-term contract. And we believe that's what's going to happen. And I think, he's, as they said, his entire contract as a second-round pick, I think, is worth $5 billion. So he's certainly outperformed that. He's going to get the $13 million payday if they can't come to an agreement. But I would think now if they had Tannehill under contract, Dennis, they're probably going to have to address with Jack Conklin moving on. They're going to have to address right tackle in the draft. But I think if Dennis Kelly could be a short-term, a stopgap guy. But I think overall they're going to pay Derrick Henry. I mean, he is the leading rusher in the NFL. We saw Zeke Elliott get paid. I think Derrick is a unique individual. He's very durable. He gets stronger as the season goes on, and I think he is the guy, the straw that stirs the drink for the Titans. Since they didn't go get Tom Brady, they decided to have Tannehill being a game manager. But the only way you're going to win if you're the Titans is to have Derrick Henry, and all these guys want a long-term extension and that financial security. And I think Derrick's going to sign a long-term deal before training camp.
Kenyan Drake, once he went to the Cardinals, boy, he really blossomed. They put the transition tag on him, which he can entertain offers, but they have a chance to match those. Of course, Cardinals bring in DeAndre Hopkins in a great deal yesterday. Mm. It looks like just a perfect fit for Drake to stay there in Arizona, and I can't imagine that he wants to leave, and I can't imagine that they want to let him go, right?
Oh, no. I mean, he was so productive for them last year. He fits into their offense. You've got Nuke Hopkins now. You've got the ageless Larry Fitzgerald. You've got Tyler Murray. And then David Johnson was banged up. He didn't fit their offense. Kenyan Drake does. And there's so many of these guys. It's great to see. Look at all these great running backs from Alabama that have been so productive. Mark Ingram going into his 10th year. Had a great year with the Ravens last year. He's still going strong. Derrick Henry, the leading rusher in the NFL. And then Kenyan Drake, a rising star. Just think about that. I mean, you had Drake and Derrick Henry on the same team to win a national championship in 2015. Both made huge plays to win that bowl matchup with Deshaun Watson. And you got to really feel good for Kenyan. He came a long way at Alabama, both as emotionally as a person, and then getting through the injuries. And he's really starting to come into his own. And he's about to get paid as well. I know they put the transition tag on him, but certainly Arizona wants to commit a long-term deal for him. And that was a great trade, him going from Miami to Arizona. It's a good fit, and I think Kenyan's in a great place right now.
All right, Drew, we just got a couple minutes, but I want to hit Jaron Reed. Glad he's staying in Seattle. Good for him. I want to ask you about A.J. Coming back to back up Watson with the Texans. I know you and I both had hoped that somewhere along the line he'd get a shot to be a starting quarterback. Doesn't quite frankly look like that's going to happen unless it's due to injury. He looks like he's kind of ticketed as a career backup, but nothing wrong with that. Good living. We saw Jeff Rutledge do it for years and years and years, and the bottom line is A.J. McCarron's going to play a long time and make a lot of money. Maybe one day he'll get a crack, but as of right now, it just looks like that he's just kind of been that's the way the league views him as a backup quarterback.
Well, yeah, he had an opportunity with Buffalo and got injured. He's had some bad luck, but, you can make a very good living as a backup quarterback. We just saw Case Keenum sign as a backup to Baker Mayfield, and he signed a 3-year, $18 million deal, $10 million guaranteed. So that would be $6 million per year. You can make a very nice living as a backup. Deshaun Watson's very important to what Houston's doing, but they obviously value A.J. as their backup QB right now. So, I mean, he may eventually get one more opportunity in his career, but if you're a backup for the majority of your NFL experience, but you put 10-plus years in the league, you're going to have an outstanding pension. And, again, the quarterback position, whether it's a starter and you're making $30-plus million a year, or as a backup, $6, $7, $8 million a year, you can make a very comfortable living holding a clipboard and maybe even transitioning into coaching if that's something that AJ wanted to do. But AJ's having a nice career as a backup so far in the NFL. Maybe he'll get another opportunity one day, but I think it was a good move for him to stay in Houston where they value him as an insurance policy to Deshaun Watson, and just hope he can continue. The more years you accrue there, the better your pension. So AJ's had a pretty good run so far as a player in the National Football League, and before that, as one of before Tua Tagovailoa came along, the best quarterback during the Nick Saban era of Alabama football.
Drew, just a couple of seconds. You think the Alabama football players, I know they'll be in verbal contact with the coaches. It gets a lot of pressure on them to handle their workouts on their own, at least until they can get back to football-related activities. You think they'll be able to do it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. From what I understand, they've all been given individual workout programs back home and access to personal trainers in their area. So they're going to be expected to stay in shape and continue to work hard. I'm sure they're going to be in constant text and phone contact with the strength coaches, David Ballou, Dr. Matt Ray, and even trying to monitor progress from afar. And certainly by the time they come back, whether that be sometime in April or May or June, then they'll get back at it. But certainly I think Alabama, with what they're doing and the hires they made and with their sports science center continuing to be built, they're going to continue to try to keep the players, in as good a shape as they can. And it's going to be interesting to see, how this extended absence from school and online stuff works out. But I think Alabama's handling it in the proper way. Yeah.
I do too. We'll try to get into that more next week. Yes or no? Mountain Brook head coach Bucky McMillan, do you think he's the next coach at Sanford?
From what I'm hearing, yes, Gary.
All right, great stuff, Drew. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.